Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When a reclusive ex-prosecutor's tranquil lakefront paradise is threatened by a ruthless HOA queenpin, a quiet property dispute explodes into a high-stakes war of lies, drones, seduction, and justice. He built this land with his hands. Now he'll fight to the last to keep it. The summer sun shimmered across the surface of my lake like a silk sheet dusted with diamonds. I stood on the dock with my niece Maddie, watching her squeal as she cannonballed into the clear, cool water. 12 acres of pure spring-fed perfection, mine. Bought fair and square from an old cattleman who gave up on fighting zoning wars and HOA vultures a decade ago. This wasn't just property. This was peace, purchased and preserved. I lived alone on my ranch, 2 miles off the county road, surrounded by nothing but green. I'd built the cabin with my own hands after retiring from the district attorney's office. 40 years old, no wife, no kids, no interest in HOA potlucks or smiling while someone measured my grass height with a ruler. Just me, my land, and the wildlife. Hawks nested in the oaks, foxes prowled the tree line, and deer drank quietly at dusk from what had always been called Porter's Lake. Until recently, it all began with a letter. A manila envelope, hand-delivered and slapped onto my front gate by a young man in an ill-fitting HOA security uniform who wouldn't look me in the eye. It bore the seal of Harmony Lakeside Residential Collective. What a pretentious mouthful that was. Inside, a citation, violation code HLRC 42A, unauthorized recreational use of shared aquatic resource. I reread it 3 times. Shared. The only thing shared on this ranch were mosquitoes and the occasional rabid raccoon. I followed the packet to the attached Lake Harmony Access Area map. My lake had been renamed, without my consent, and labeled as a designated amenity. Apparently because a portion of my southern shoreline butted up against their cookie-cutter hellscape, someone decided my lake now belonged to them. And the fine? $5,000 for swimming in my lake with my niece. I laughed. I genuinely, out loud laughed. Then I poured myself a bourbon, walked out to the water, and swam 2 laps just to spite them. But the laughter didn't last. That night, I dug out every title deed, survey plat, boundary marker, and zoning certificate I'd kept since purchasing the place. All confirmed what I already knew. My lake was fully contained within my property lines. But the next morning, I found 3 laminated Notice of Pending Enforcement signs staked along my shoreline, HOA logos proudly stamped in red, warning of communal use restrictions. That's when I knew it wasn't just a clerical error. It was war. At first, I tried the polite route. I called the HOA office, asked to speak to whoever the hell thought they had jurisdiction over private property. That's when I met her. Cassandra? Call me Cassie Lancaster. But everyone in the neighborhood, and now in my nightmares, called her Karen, 35, dressed like she'd stepped out of a country club catalog, with legs that went on for miles and skirts that barely covered the first few. Her voice dripped sugar, but her words were pure acid. She was concerned about alignment with community values. She suggested I consider the spirit of inclusivity. I asked her which part of trespassing and extortion fit into that spirit. She giggled. That week, I was invited, no, summoned, to an HOA Emergency General Assembly meeting held in their spotless little community center. I went. Sat quietly in the back in my muddy boots, while Karen clicked her PowerPoint remote and spoke about reclaiming public spaces and repurposing underutilized assets for collective joy. I was the slide, my lake. Photos taken from drones, apparently. She called it Lake Harmony. She pointed at a screen and said, "As you can see, this body of water is functionally part of our ecological corridor. Our bylaws permit us to annex non-compliant environmental zones that serve multiple community households. As such, we're enacting a temporary moratorium on private usage." Someone applauded. I stood, calmly. Looked around the room at a bunch of beige people in beige chairs clutching HOA pamphlets like holy scripture. I said, "That's my land. That's my lake. You're all out of your damn minds." Karen smiled like a cat watching a canary fly into a ceiling fan. The fine held, $5,000, payable within 15 business days. I filed it directly into my fireplace and poured myself another bourbon. But I wasn't done laughing. Not anymore. That night, I ordered 2 things online, a drone with thermal imaging, and the best damn property law attorney in the state. Because Karen had just picked a fight with a man who used to put people like her behind bars. And I don't lose. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was scared. Hell no. Because I was angry. The kind of anger that sits in your chest like a glowing coal, too hot to swallow, too cold to ignore. Karen had crossed a line, and not just any line. My property line. I wasn't about to let some sun-bleached dictator in stilettos rewrite the definition of private land. At dawn, I made calls. First to a cadastral engineer named Vince, a grizzled guy with 30 years in the field and the trustworthiness of someone who wears cargo shorts year-round. By noon, he was out walking my perimeter with GPS gear, shaking his head every few minutes. Whoever drew these HOA boundaries, he muttered, was either drunk or criminally stupid. Next was Rebecca Trammell, a land use attorney out of Lexington. She showed up in boots and a blazer, scanned the HOA packet I'd kept from the fireplace, and said, "They're done." Her voice was calm, almost amused. "This is textbook overreach. No jurisdiction, no standing. The lake is yours." That was all I needed to hear, but I wasn't stopping at rebuttal. Karen had gone further than an honest mistake. While Vince prepared certified maps proving that the lake was entirely within my deeded parcel, I started digging, figuratively and digitally. And oh, did the skeletons come tumbling out. I learned that HOA funds had been quietly used to renovate shoreline picnic areas that didn't legally exist. HOA newsletters began referring to Lake Harmony events, including a community fishing derby held last fall. They even sold $15 Harmony Anglers passes, online. All of it, on my land. Then came the smoking gun. Someone forwarded me a spreadsheet from an internal HOA Dropbox, probably a disgruntled board member who realized the ship was sinking. In it were line items for community waterfront rentals, $30 or $200 last quarter. A note: thanks to Cassie's arrangement, Karen had been renting access to my lake, as if she owned it. She'd even created an internal HOA map with a redrawn parcel boundary that looped half my lake into her community recreational zone. It was amateurish, a PowerPoint diagram posing as a legal map, but damning nonetheless. The kicker? She had labeled it verified via Google Earth. I couldn't believe it. This woman was using satellite screenshots to justify annexing my land. I've seen gangsters with more legal tact. The more I uncovered, the worse it got. HOA volunteers had entered my property to set up event banners. Someone spray-painted "Welcome to Harmony" on one of my oaks. A guy in a fishing vest even waved at me one morning from a dock I didn't build. I confronted him. "You know you're trespassing, right?" "Oh, Karen said this was the community's fishing zone. Karen's about to meet a very unfriendly judge." He packed up real quick. Meanwhile, I installed trail cams around the lake. Infrared, motion-sensitive, time-stamped. Every day brought more footage, couples picnicking on my dock, teenagers climbing my boathouse, and one old guy peeing off my canoe rack like it was his birthright. That footage, those maps, those internal memos, they weren't just evidence. They were ammunition. Then came the moment I knew Karen had gone too far. I got a voicemail from her, sugary sweet. "Hi, Evan, I just wanted to check in. There have been some complaints that you're being aggressive toward community guests. I'd hate to escalate things, so maybe we can chat and find a solution. Remember, we all have to live together. Let's be neighbors, not enemies." I played that message 5 times. Each time, it sounded more like a threat in a cocktail dress. I didn't respond. I compiled everything, maps, videos, documents, and drove to Lexington to hand it directly to Rebecca. She looked at the pile, then at me. This isn't just overreach. This is organized fraud. If we push this, she could go down hard. I didn't smile. I just said, "Then push." I didn't have to wait long. A sheriff's deputy knocked on my door 3 days later with a manila envelope, almost apologetic. "Sorry, Mr. Richmond. It's a civil notice." I didn't need to open it. I already knew what it was. Karen had sued me. The claim? That I'd obstructed community access to shared aquatic resources, verbally threatened designated community representatives, and, my favorite, willfully disregarded the spirit of cooperative neighborhood governance. They used legal language like a drunk uses karaoke, off-key but enthusiastic. Rebecca read the complaint, raised an eyebrow, and poured herself a cup of my coffee. "They're accusing you of obstructing a public resource, a resource that's on land no one else owns. We're filing a counterclaim." Her words were calm, but her eyes were sharp. She smelled blood in the legal water. That afternoon, we filed a lawsuit against both Karen personally and the HOA entity. Grounds: trespass, fraud, unlawful appropriation of private assets, malicious misrepresentation, and, just for flavor, civil conspiracy. Rebecca didn't like half measures. News spread fast. The local paper ran a headline: Private Lake or Public Lie. HOA faces fraud allegations. Karen responded with an email blast to every resident titled, HOA Under Siege by Hostile Outsider. I read it with a glass of wine in hand. She'd written it like a call to arms, invoking community pride, heritage, and a quote from Thoreau. She even capitalized "our lake" every time. The response was mixed. Some of the neighbors seemed spooked. Others started quietly emailing me, admitting they had no idea the lake wasn't HOA controlled, and asking if I'd drop my suit if Karen resigned. I didn't reply, not yet. The HOA doubled down. They retained an expensive firm out of Louisville, Elliott, Frost, and McKee. Their lead litigator, Gregory Frost, showed up at the preliminary hearing looking like he slept in a coffin and fed on junior associates. He tried to get the suit dismissed on procedural grounds. The judge wasn't amused. Karen was there too, sitting at the counsel table in a white blazer and pearls, looking like she was auditioning for a Stepford reboot. She wouldn't look at me, but she smiled at the press photographers. During that hearing, we presented the first taste of our evidence: aerial maps, deed records, and notarized testimony from the original landowner who'd sold me the property. The judge read the documents, leaned back, and said, "So this is entirely on Mr. Richmond's land?" Rebecca nodded. "Yes, Your Honor, and we have more, including evidence that Ms. Lancaster profited from misrepresenting that land as HOA controlled." Karen's lawyer shifted uncomfortably. The judge set the full trial date, 4 weeks out, and issued a protective order barring HOA activities near my property. That included signage, events, and any attempt to enforce governance. Karen smiled like she hadn't just been smacked with a judicial rolled-up newspaper, but behind the scenes, her smile was cracking. We started hearing things. Her vice president had quit the HOA board to spend more time with family. The treasurer emailed Rebecca anonymously and confirmed that Karen had created the fake maps personally, then ordered him to distribute them. He'd refused. She'd overwritten his login and sent them anyway. This wasn't just bad behavior, it was full-on embezzlement. HOA funds had been used to print banners, pay for drone flights, and hire freelance security patrols to monitor Harmony access, all for a property they didn't own. Karen still walked around the neighborhood like a queen, but the court date loomed. Every day, I'd see her SUV pass by the edge of my land, slower than usual. Once, she stopped, just watched. I watched back. My phone rang that night. It was Rebecca. "We just got notice." Karen's attorney filed a motion to suppress some of our evidence, claiming it was obtained without proper HOA consent. "You mean the documents she herself forged and distributed?" "That's the one." I sighed. "Is she desperate or stupid?" Rebecca chuckled. "Both, but mostly desperate." Then came the final signal. Karen filed a subpoena for my drone footage, trying to argue that I had unlawfully surveilled community members. It was laughable. I owned the land. The cameras were mine. And every person caught on them was technically a trespasser. She was throwing mud at the wall now, hoping something would stick. But I was already 2 steps ahead. I wasn't just going to win this. I was going to bury her. She showed up just after sunset. I'd spent the day checking trail cams and reviewing deposition drafts with Rebecca, expecting more legal maneuvering from Karen's camp. What I didn't expect was her white Tesla pulling quietly into my gravel driveway, headlights off, like she was sneaking into a lover's cabin in a bad soap opera. She stepped out slowly. No clipboard, no sunglasses, no entourage, just her. She wore a pale blue sundress, something that looked soft enough to slip off a hanger without a sound, and heels that shouldn't have held on gravel, but somehow did. Her blonde hair was loose, framing her face like a Pinterest ad. For a moment, I thought maybe she'd finally come to throw a rock through my window. Instead, she smiled. Not her usual HOA podium smirk. This one was smaller, realer, a little sad. "Evan," she said, almost a whisper. I didn't move from the porch. "You're trespassing, Karen," I said. She gave a faint laugh. "Not officially. Your property line starts at the oak. Don't push your luck." She stood there for a second, eyes on the lake behind me, then stepped closer. "I didn't come to fight," she said. "Can we talk?" I didn't say yes. I didn't say no either. I just stepped aside and let her climb the stairs. She walked past me into the cabin like she'd been here a dozen times before. I closed the door behind her, suddenly aware that she was wearing perfume that smelled like cold peaches and rain. Inside, she didn't sit. She wandered, casually, deliberately, her fingers grazing the wood grain of my kitchen table, pausing at a bookshelf where I kept a row of old case files I never could bring myself to shred. She stopped at the window, looking out at the lake. "It's beautiful," she said. "You really built something here." I didn't do it for approval. "No," she said, turning back to me. "You did it to escape. You left a world of power and compromise and came out here to be untouchable. But nothing's untouchable, Evan. Not really." I crossed my arms. "Get to the point." She stepped closer, her voice softer. "They're going to crucify me. You know that." "You earned it." Karen winced but didn't argue. She lowered her eyes, took a breath, and whispered, "I made mistakes." I waited. I never meant for it to go this far. It started with one event, one drone photo. People loved the idea of Lake Harmony. They wanted a place that felt like it belonged to all of us. I liked being the one who gave it to them. You gave them my land. I know, and I'm sorry. I let it spiral. The board started asking questions. So I lied. Then I forged. Then I paid off our old mapping consultant. I just kept going. And now? Karen looked up at me, eyes glassy but dry. "Now I'm looking at 5 to 10 years for fraud if your case wins. And you know it will. You're good. I knew you'd be good. I didn't think you'd be this relentless." I didn't answer. She stepped closer, just inches from me now. "I'm not asking for mercy," she said. "But maybe there's another way." Her hand touched my chest lightly, just over the sternum. It stayed there. We could both drop the suits, clean slate. Let the lawyers go home. No press, no headlines, just you and me. No more games. I looked down at her hand, then at her face. For a woman so poised, she looked tired, frightened, human. "Let me guess," I said. "You'll step down, disappear for a while, rebrand in a new zip code. You just need me to play the benevolent loner with a heart of gold." She didn't deny it. She just leaned up and kissed me. It wasn't tentative. I didn't pull away. The rest of the night blurred. Bourbon. Laughter. Her legs over mine as we sat on the dock. Her voice low and apologetic in the dark. Half whispers about her childhood, her fears, how this whole thing started with a broken HOA budget and an idea for a picnic that got out of control. By the time the moon was overhead, we were upstairs. The dress came off like it had been waiting to. Her perfume stayed. At dawn, I woke up alone in bed. She was in the kitchen, barefoot, wrapped in one of my flannel shirts. She looked up with the faintest smile. "You could destroy me," she said. I walked over, handed her a mug of coffee, and looked her straight in the eyes. "I'm still deciding." And in that moment, she looked unsure for the first time in her life. She left an hour later. No kiss, no promises, just a long glance back at the cabin as she stepped into her car and drove away without a word. I watched until the dust settled. Then I poured myself a drink and opened the folder labeled Contingency Plan B. The next morning, I woke up early. Too early. The kind of early that has nothing to do with roosters and everything to do with conscience or strategy. I sat on the porch with black coffee and the echo of last night still hanging in the walls of my cabin like expensive perfume. Karen had left barefoot, flannel shirt tied at the waist, her heels dangling from 2 fingers like a trophy or a surrender flag. It would have been a nice ending in another life, but this wasn't that kind of story. By 9 a.m., I was at Rebecca's office with a USB drive. She raised an eyebrow. "Something tells me you didn't bring this because you need help with your taxes." I slid it across the desk. "It's all here. Everything. Audio from last night." She admitted it. The forgery, the access rentals, the manipulation. Hell, she basically begged for a private settlement. Rebecca plugged it in and hit play. Karen's voice, warm and drowsy, filled the room. "I just wanted to give them something beautiful. It started small, Evan. And then I couldn't stop. I was afraid you'd ruin everything. But if we call it even, walk away clean. Nobody has to go down." Rebecca listened in silence, her fingers laced under her chin, eyes sharp. "This is gold. The judge hears this. She's toast." "And then some," I said. We spent the next few hours preparing a sealed submission to the court, a supplemental motion to include new evidence. The audio was clean. I'd warned her the cabin had surveillance, which was true. Mostly. I didn't mention the mic I'd clipped to my own shirt pocket before she arrived. The law was on my side. The ethics. That was murkier. But when the enemy uses seduction as a shield, you use the truth as a sword. 2 days later, in court, Karen walked in like she hadn't spent the night begging for absolution on my deck. She wore charcoal gray this time, hair up, pearl earrings, composed. It was all very senator's wife on damage control. I didn't look at her. Not once. Rebecca laid out the full strategy, maps, receipts, eyewitness statements, and then the flash drive. The judge looked at her over the rim of his glasses. "Is this what you described in your supplemental?" "Yes, Your Honor." He inserted it into the court laptop, headphones on, brows tightening with every passing second. By the 3rd minute, he stopped it and took the headphones off. "Ms. Lancaster," he said slowly, "do you deny this is your voice?" She hesitated. Her lawyer stood. "Your Honor, we request an evidentiary hearing to—" "No," the judge said flatly. "This isn't a technical dispute. This is an admission of material fact. Under oath, you claimed ignorance. On this tape, you claim authorship. That's perjury at minimum, possibly more." Karen didn't speak. Her skin had gone pale under the courtroom lights. For a moment, she looked small, almost fragile. Rebecca leaned over to me and whispered, "This is the part where she either folds or explodes." She folded. Her attorney requested a recess. It was granted. Outside the courtroom, Karen approached me in the hallway, alone. Her voice was different now, lower, broken at the edges. "You set me up," she said. "I didn't blink. You set yourself up. I just hit record. I trusted you. No. You gambled. You thought I'd want you more than justice. You were wrong." She stood there for a long beat. Then she said softly, "I didn't think you'd be cruel." I leaned in, close enough that no one else could hear. "I'm not cruel," I said. "I'm careful. And unlike you, I don't fake ownership of things that don't belong to me." She walked away without another word. Back inside, her attorney offered a conditional plea agreement, immediate resignation from the HOA, withdrawal of her suit, full financial restitution, and cooperation in the ongoing investigation. The judge didn't respond immediately. Instead, he said, "This court takes the misuse of civil institutions, especially ones based on trust, with utmost seriousness. Expect sentencing to reflect that." Karen didn't cry. She just nodded, and I didn't feel sorry, not even a little. Because forgiveness is earned, and all she brought me was a lie in a silk dress. The courtroom was packed on the day of sentencing. I recognized faces from the neighborhood, some curious, some ashamed, most just relieved it wasn't them sitting where Karen was. The gallery buzzed with whispers that died instantly when the bailiff called the room to order. The judge entered. No robe flourish, no theater, just the weight of justice settling into the room like a slow-moving storm. Karen sat rigid, hands clasped in her lap, lips tight. Gone were the pearls. Gone was the gloss. She wore a plain navy blouse and a court-ordered ankle monitor under black slacks. It suited her better, if I'm being honest. Made her look like what she finally was. A defendant, not a queen bee. The charges had expanded since our last hearing. Not just civil fraud and trespassing. The county prosecutor had picked up the case and added criminal charges, falsification of public records, unauthorized financial disbursement of non-profit funds, and conspiracy to defraud. The word felony was starting to make regular appearances. Rebecca presented our final statements with a calm professionalism that almost disguised the blade underneath. "Your Honor, what began as a dispute over signage evolved into a campaign of lies, intimidation, and institutional abuse. Ms. Lancaster used the power entrusted to her not to serve her community, but to elevate her own image and profit. She manipulated HOA documents, misled residents, and attempted to criminalize a man for swimming in his own lake. This wasn't governance. This was conquest." Karen's lawyer tried to counter with a prepared speech about misjudged intentions and a woman under pressure, but the words fell flat. Even the defense team looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Then the judge spoke. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Ms. Lancaster, the court finds that you knowingly and willfully engaged in actions that constitute a pattern of deception and exploitation. You fabricated maps, forged board consensus, and misappropriated funds. You then compounded these offenses by weaponizing civil mechanisms against an innocent landowner, one whose only violation was refusing to bend to your will. He paused, then continued. For these reasons, this court sentences you to 6 years in state prison, with eligibility for parole after 4, pending good behavior and restitution compliance. You are hereby barred from holding office in any homeowners association or nonprofit entity for life. Additionally, you are ordered to pay $120,000 in damages, covering both financial restitution and emotional distress. The courtroom exhaled. Karen didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just closed her eyes for a moment. A single blink, slow and hollow. And then the deputies stood, and she stood with them, wrists gently cuffed, escorted toward a door she would not walk out of for a long time. As she passed me, she looked at me, just for a second. I held her gaze. There was no triumph in my eyes, no gloating, only silence. After the gavel fell, the courtroom emptied like a drained aquarium. People avoided my eyes. A few nodded in quiet approval. One man, a former HOA member if I remembered right, murmured, "You did the right thing." Rebecca handed me a signed court copy of the final judgment. "It's over," she said. "No," I replied, "it's done." There's a difference. Later that week, the local news station ran a segment, Justice at Lake Harmony. They filmed me, walking by the shore, now legally renamed Porter's Refuge. A drone shot caught the sun shimmering across the water. A new wooden sign stood at the trailhead. Private conservation area. Trespassers will be prosecuted. They asked if I wanted to say anything on camera. I declined. Some things don't need words. Some things just need the truth. It rained the day they took down the HOA banners. Strips of vinyl flapped against the cold wind, peeling away from the community center like dead skin. The words Lake Harmony event schedule curled inwards and fell into the mud, one letter at a time. No one came to retrieve them. Karen's resignation had triggered a mandatory restructuring of the HOA. The state appointed a legal trustee to oversee operations. Bank accounts were frozen, audits launched. Turns out, the rot went deeper than Karen, though she'd been the worst of it. Dozens of residents filed complaints once she was sentenced. Some wanted their money back. Others just wanted their dignity. And me? I stayed quiet. The court had awarded me $120,000. A chunk went to cover Rebecca's fees. Another to build a proper fence around the far side of the lake. The rest, I donated to the Kentucky Wetlands Preservation Fund. Let the bastards talk. The lake was mine again, legally, publicly, permanently, and it had a name now. Porter's Refuge, engraved on a weather-treated cedar sign planted near the boat dock, named after my grandfather who taught me how to cast a line and keep a secret. The designation came with an official status, Protected Ecological Reserve. That meant no fishing, no boating, no unauthorized access. And this time, it was backed by state and federal law. The funny thing was, people respected it more now. Even the ones who once snuck in with fishing poles and folding chairs. Maybe because they knew what it had cost. Maybe because they'd watched a woman burn her own reputation to cinders trying to take what wasn't hers. One evening, about a month after sentencing, a group of kids from the edge of the HOA zone came by with trash bags. No graffiti, no shouting, just quiet pickup along the gravel trail that skirted the lake's north edge. I watched them from the porch, coffee in hand. When they noticed me, they waved. No words, just respect. Later that week, I got a letter, typed, signed in pen, from the new interim HOA chair, a former librarian named Alice Moreau. She apologized for the actions of the board, acknowledged my right to privacy and property, and asked, genuinely, if I'd be willing to speak at the next community assembly. I didn't say yes, but I didn't say no either. I drove by the old community center one morning and saw flyers taped to the inside windows. New tone, new people, transparency and reform, it said. Let's make things right. It didn't smell like fear anymore. And Karen? She disappeared from conversation like a taboo. No one said her name aloud, not in meetings, not in grocery lines. Her house went up for sale. The listing avoided words like former HOA president or legal action. It just said, quiet corner lot. Price to move. Poetic, really. The system didn't just punish her, it healed from her. And while I wasn't anyone's hero, I wasn't their enemy either. I was just the man with the lake, the man who said no, and made it stick. The water was still. Not calm, still. There's a difference. Calm is the absence of trouble. Stillness is what remains after the trouble's past. I stood at the edge of Porter's Refuge, boots half sunk in the muddy bank, morning mist curling off the surface like breath. The trees were turning now, burnt gold and brittle orange, as if the forest itself had decided to shed what no longer served it. Seemed appropriate. I hadn't spoken to Karen since the sentencing. I never visited the prison, never replied to the short letter her lawyer mailed on her behalf. It wasn't even an apology, more like a lament. 4 sentences that said, "You were right, I was wrong, but I still don't know how to be someone else." I didn't answer. Some people you don't save. Some people you bury, metaphorically or legally. The new HOA leadership was, shockingly, decent. Alice Moreau ran things like a teacher handles a rowdy class. No screaming, no favorites, just quiet structure. The new board invited me to one of their public meetings. I went, sat in the back, listened. No one mentioned Karen. They talked about recycling, traffic speed limits, and getting a better contract for lawn maintenance. They were boring. God, it was wonderful. After the meeting, a teenage boy, maybe 17, approached me. "Hey," he said, "I helped clean up your lake trail. It's cool what you did." I nodded. "Thanks." He hesitated. "You think she ever meant well?" I looked at him for a long second. "I think meaning well doesn't count for much when you do harm." He nodded, like that made more sense than it should have. Then he walked off into the parking lot. I stood by the lake later that evening and watched the stars crawl into place. No parties, no banners, no drones, just wind and water and the sound of frogs chirping somewhere down by the cattails. I thought about justice. It's not revenge. Not really. Revenge wants suffering. Justice wants closure. And I had closure. A boundary redrawn in ink and law and reputation. But more than that, I had my lake. The last thing I did before heading in that night was hammer a small brass plate into the dock's railing. Something simple, subtle, for me. It read, "Private, protected, paid for," and beneath that, in smaller letters, "Let no thief call this home."